The Education Secretary Gavin Williamson is asking parents to make sure their children keep testing for Covid-19. Schools in Scotland have already gone back, but those in Northern Ireland, Wales and England will return later on this week. Oh, the wonderful summer holiday is over. But where does the responsibility lie to get those tests done? Should it be with the parents, or actually maybe should the school take control?
Well, Chris McGovern is a former head teacher and chairman of the Campaign for Real Education. And he joins us now. Welcome to the show. So really, first of all, where should this responsibility lie, assuming that these tests are going to go on and the government has said that they will, at least for September, be asking pupils to test?
Well, the legal responsibility for educating one's child is the parents. Not all parents choose to use state schools. Some use private schools. Some educate their children at home. It'd be outrageous if we had schools making the decision as to whether to jab their children or not. So the responsibility legally, I think, is with the parents. And if the government thinks otherwise, then I'm sure they will face a legal challenge to that. It's unacceptable in a democratic society to have servants of the state jabbing children. I think a lot of teachers will.
What do you mean jabbing children in terms of getting them to do the tests, the teachers?
Giving them tests. I don't mean jabbing. What I mean is what they're going to be giving them. They're going to get swabbing their noses and so forth. They're going to be testing the children one way or another. Now, look, I'm someone who's actually had the jabs myself, but I do think it's a right of parents to make the decisions for their children, and that is a legal right. I think we're going into very dangerous territory when schools get too involved in this, and it's a situation which I think many parents will feel most unhappy with. Parents are the first educators of their children, not the government, not the Secretary of State.
So just to be really clear, you think the parents should be in charge of the testing, and if the parents would make the decision about whether their children would get vaccinated as well?
Absolutely the parents, but I would go back and say, well, is there a need for all this testing in any case? Because here we have a situation where it's almost like a control freak in charge saying we've got to test everybody all the time. We know that children aren't suffering hardly at all from the virus. They're not suffering from the virus. Most parents and grandparents are double vaccinated. And certainly as a grandparent myself, and I'm sure I reflect the views of most parents and grandparents, we want the children to come first. And what we don't want is plenty of excuses for closing schools. So I think to some extent the government are dancing to the tune of the teacher unions here. We're looking for excuses to close schools. I suppose you could argue that by closing schools in the last 9 months or so, the last year, we've had the best exam results ever. But that would be a rather cynical view.
Well, who was doing the testing last time around? Because, of course, 2 tests a week have been mandatory for school children for some time before they broke up for the summer holidays. I believe it was parents who were asked to make sure those tests were happening last time round, and the government has indicated that this might not go on forever. They said that at least September, if I remember correctly, they will continue asking for these tests to be done, but potentially as we go forward, as we continue to emerge from the pandemic, as it becomes endemic in the country, that may become less necessary. What are the differences between September and back before the summer holidays?
Well, there aren't any great differences other than that we're safer now, we're more secure now, we have more adults vaccinated. And yes, before the summer holidays, there were tests taking place. Children were effectively testing themselves at home, those who wanted to do it. Look, I've taught for 35 years. I can tell you now, it's a certainty that a large number of children didn't really bother with the test. And sometimes actually they fixed the test so that they failed the test and could stay at home. So it's not a reliable situation. But the good news is that children aren't suffering from the test. They're much more likely to be injured in a road accident than to die of coronavirus. So, yeah, it's a situation which hasn't really changed. And we've got to get real and live with this virus. Look, it's a deadly virus, and but the death rate has fallen dramatically. And the trouble is that the poor, in particular in our society, are suffering when schools close. What we're going to see next term is probably going to be chaos, because we're going to have pressure put on parents, we're going to have pressure put on schools to do these tests. And what we're going to find is children themselves getting worried. You know, what's happening here is the government is whipping up a state of panic. You've got to get tested twice a week. You've got to do it yourself. You've got to do it with your parents. Maybe the teachers will do it. What does the government think? What's going to happen to our exam results? So it's hysterical, all of this. Schools need to stay open. And if children have got the virus and they're found they fail a test, they go home. And the rest of the school carries on. For heaven's sake, this is common sense.
But Chris, I mean, that does rely on the testing taking part, doesn't it? What really is the argument to say children shouldn't be tested twice a week? They could just do it at home, come to school, and then if someone does get the infection, we know about it sooner rather than later.
Well, first of all, it doesn't work because certainly a lot of children, if they're being tested at home, aren't being tested. Some children play the system, as I said. They will pretend that they will find a way of failing the test. And it doesn't actually work. It's also very disruptive and very expensive. Teachers are spending their time overseeing the COVID crisis rather than teaching. We go into this crisis a year and a half ago with the country about 3 years behind the best education systems in the world. And we've fallen further behind since, in spite of those exam results. And we've got to find a way of actually getting out of the crisis. We don't get out of the crisis in our education standards by whipping up hysteria about the non-existent threats to children. Children are not in danger. They don't need all these tests. Yes, if the child is ill, of course they need to be tested. What I would say is the majority of children don't need to be tested. And if they are going to be tested, it needs to be done at home with their parents. And it doesn't need to be twice a week. That's just excessive. And I think we've got to think particularly about poor children, because schools are going to close. And when those schools close because one child has failed a test or a whole year group goes home, this is terribly damaging to young people. So we've got to look forward and keep our schools open. But what I'm saying, you're not going to hear from the teacher unions. One of the bosses of the main teachers' union said a few months ago, widely publicised, any head teacher who goes against the advice of the union will be named and shamed. What they do in Sicily with the mafia and so forth. So it's not very pleasant out there for teachers, not very pleasant for head teachers. They've got to go with what the unions tell them to do. And the unions are fighting.
How would you advise a head teacher right now who's got a whole new, let's say, primary school cohort of people turning up in 3 days' time?
Well, it's to get on with the job, which is about teaching children and making sure that they're literate and numerous and can get a job in the future. That's what I would say. And if there's
make a decision about testing, the head teacher's either going to ask parents, please make sure you have your children tested, or not. So, what decision do you think they should make?
I think the individual schools should make their own. My own view would be that if parents are concerned, of course they should carry out the test. Parents who are very much against this, and there are many parents who are against it, should not feel that they are forced in a democratic society to have to test their children. I would also stop whipping up the hysteria. Some children are getting quite fearful. And if you're a 10-year-old in primary school, you don't need to be tested. But if you're an 11-year-old in secondary school, you do. What's the difference? Not very much. So we're whipping up these children into a state of frenzy. They've got enough mental health problems as it is. We need to focus on giving them something which they can actually hold on to, which is a good education. So we're going to look forward to some sort of chaos, I suspect, over the next few weeks. And we need some direction. But just constantly worrying about the fate of children is not helping, because children are not at risk and parents know that. So I wouldn't interfere. I would tell parents, look, it's up to you. You can test the children if you want to.
Now, of course, there are some changes in the bubble system, whereby whole year groups would have to go and isolate if there's just one positive test. That's been scrapped now, and instead it'll probably be close contacts of those who do test positive. So is this really, are we making a mountain out of a molehill here? Is this potentially not going to be the huge disruptor there was very real disruption to education before the summer holidays, but potentially now there would be less?
Yeah, I mean, you use the word probably. Probably the year groups won't won't be sent home. Of course, that was absurd, and any sensible head teacher would know that. You don't punish an entire year group because one child has got a virus which is not going to harm them. So we hope things are going to be much better, don't we? I mean, we need to put these children first. The only question we really need to ask, what is in the best interest of children? Is it in the best interest of children that they should be sent home if the head teacher decides that perhaps they're showing symptoms? That may be the right thing to do. Isn't it in the best interest to send the whole year group home? Some parents are getting very edgy, I know. They're worried that maybe their child will get the virus from the school. And of course, there are always exceptions. So when I say that schools need to stay open, what I'm saying is it's in the best interest of the children for the schools to stay open. I'm pretty certain that the majority of parents would agree with me. And if they don't agree with me, they don't have to send their child to a state school. They can educate them at home or continue educating their children at home. But the disruption this is causing is meaning that the price we pay for closing our schools or sending children home or constantly testing is too high, because you can test as much as you like, But at the end of the day, these children aren't affected.
Yeah, you're talking about the impact it would have on children. Chris, thank you so much for speaking to us. Chris McGovern there, who runs the campaign for Real Education, also former head teacher, suggesting there that if parents are unhappy with doing 2 tests a week and they don't want to do it, to homeschool instead.